I always start back at college. I went to MIT where I studied economics, but I was always, MIT is a school where it's an engineering school, right? And it's also very entrepreneurial, and so it's always about building. And the economics department there is quite small, so I was in fact surrounded by engineers. My friends were engineers. Everyone I lived with were engineers. So I went there wanting to work on Wall Street, and I left wanting to work in Silicon Valley. So, that's where I got a lot of influence. And actually, even just like a little bit before going to college, and probably maybe to some extent what helped me get in, is that I was entrepreneurial. So like I said, I wanted to work on Wall Street. I had started the Investors Club in my high school. We published a bi-weekly newsletter, financial newsletter in high school. And then also my father still has a business where he buys and sells jewelry and watches like Rolex, Patek, and things like that. And so I actually got with one of my friends who ended up going to Stanford, and we made a little website called Time Trader where these watch dealers could buy and sell watches. So I guess I kind of had that bug in me, and then getting to MIT and having that be a hotbed for entrepreneurship, it all just sort of compounded, and I knew, okay, I need to build. I definitely want to spend my career building something new.
So is Up and Go your first startup? Did you already set up and establish earlier companies?
No, it's not my first. It's definitely the most successful. I have spent my career variously trying one or two different things, startups, or, working in really related fields. Before Up and Go, I had a company where I raised some money for, and my idea was to build like a group instant messenger, which is basically what Slack is, but VCs would say like, oh, I don't see the need for that. And also push messaging was built into that. And so although I just raised a little bit of angel money, I ended up actually creating a patent portfolio that I sold for, in the seven figures to LinkedIn. And then it became owned by Microsoft, which just confirms that, I have a good sense of how to create technology. They ended up turning that two patents into nearly 20 patents. And if you look at that patent, it's cited by Google, everyone you could imagine, Apple even. So it's kind of like a pretty important patent. And anyway, that's what I like doing. I like creating technology. And this time around was very focused on, solving a specific problem for restaurants that has taken off.
Go groups, I think the timing was early. What did you learn in that experience?
Well, the timing was early. Kind of been prior to Up and Go, I think I was too ahead of things, and now I maybe that was part of the learning is solve something more incremental. So a lot of those ideas were bigger, and with current business, what I decided is focus on like a very, very specific problem that you could implement today, and it would solve a problem today, and then that becomes the kernel from which things can grow, rather than like starting with the big idea. Start with the small idea to grow into the big idea. And actually, what's interesting is when I was a kid, I would always spend the Saturdays at my dad's jewelry store, and I kind of learned from that as well. Like when I was 12, my dad basically took all the money he had and he built this fanciest jewelry store in the fanciest part of town. Guess what happened? Like it didn't work out, and he sort of lost all his money. And then what he did is he had to go and borrow $20,000 from a friend, and he built the junkiest jewelry store in the junkiest part of town. And then that became very successful. And so that was actually like a learning point for me where I was like, okay, I think of it as like, you have a magnifying glass and you aim it at a piece of paper and you could start a fire, right? It's a very small point, but you just get very concentrated and you start a fire. But if you just hold the paper up to the sun, it's not going to catch fire. So that's a line of thinking that is ingrained within me, is focus on a very specific problem, solve it. As long as you have one thing that's solving a problem, you can take it anywhere, right? I mean, name a big successful company that only has one product and hasn't built more products. It's just doesn't exist.
How does your family shape your entrepreneurship journey then?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my dad's always been an entrepreneur, and moreover, like even relating it back to, I know we haven't started talking about Up and Go yet, which is in the restaurant industry. I mean, that's even how my parents met. My dad had a restaurant in Solana Beach, and my mom walked in one day and became a server. And I wasn't there. That's what I was told. And, so even then as a kid, I was like bussing tables in this restaurant. I guess I had a reputation for frying random things in the kitchen when no one was looking. Yeah, just, I guess being, and always spending those Saturdays with my dad, whatever he was doing, I just saw that was just my exposure to business is like, okay, you make your own thing. And that's pretty much what I've focused on.
What inspired you to start Up and Go? What did you see that it hasn't been solved in the restaurant business?
Well, that's a good question. We can't think about it in the frame of 2024. I will ask you to rewind 8 years to 2016. And, I was out dining with friends. I live in the middle of downtown San Diego. There's a lot of restaurants. And I remember having this one experience with a friend of mine where I met him up. I think I had a Coke or something, and he had 3 whiskeys and a hamburger. And then he said, okay, cool, let's split the check. I was like, okay, guy. And so I think I did, because that's just who I am. But it got me thinking. And I said, okay, like this is a problem technology should be able to solve. Like, why isn't the check on your phone? And then you could say, look, I had the Coke, I'm paying for the Coke, you pay for everything else. So the idea of Up and Go started with solving that very specific problem. Splitting the check inside of a restaurant.
How does Up and Go differentiate itself from other payment solutions?
Well, really our focus is on the look and feel of the experience, making it very highly branded towards the restaurant. Also, like a lot of what we do goes into reliability. So pay at the table is this thing, people look at it and they go, oh my God, that looks simple. It's just a checkout page. But in fact, it's probably the most complicated piece of software in the restaurant technology industry, because it is really the glue between not only a number of different computer systems, right? You've got the restaurant's point of sale, you've got the credit card processing, but it's also people. And so on one hand, you could have 2 or 3 people at a table trying to, pay for the same thing. And then you could also have a server like trying to manipulate the check in the POS. And then these POSs, many of them are kind of built on older technologies, and they have a lot of just inherent things that can go wrong. So this is really a situation where 1,000 things can go wrong, and you have to make sure 0 things go wrong to have a successful payment. And some people will do it in a perfect scenario, like, look at this, it worked, But when you put it out there and you have, in our case, like, 17 million payments, you see, basically if you want to handle the kind of scale that, big enterprise restaurants use, you're going to have to make sure that, something that might go wrong once in 50 or 100,000 payments can't go wrong. So there's a lot of complexity to it. And Up and Go's really like mastered that. So we're all about the payment reliability. You don't want, it's funny, like paying your check seems like such an unimportant thing. Someone's not having a heart attack in a hospital about to die, but sometimes you feel the same amount of stress because, if someone thinks they paid, but the money's not there, and then they want to leave and the server doesn't have the money, and then the manager doesn't know who to call, it's crazy, for paying your check. You can feel the same amount of stress, like I said, as someone like about to die in a hospital, which is totally ridiculous. That's just the nature of restaurants. 1 second ticking by in a restaurant is like 10 minutes, 1 second ticking by with a payment problem is like 10 minutes going by in real life. And so anyway, we're just really, really focused on making that payment very secure, good experience for everybody. And then, of course, piling on, more features. Like now we collect information. We ask people how their food experience was. We ask them how everything on their menu was. I recently looked at one of our clients. We've gotten about 14,000 reviews after people paid with Up and Go. And they've only had this running for 10 months. Their Yelp page, which has been up for 4 years, has 600 reviews. We're also in the right place in the right time. And by the way, our 14,000 versus Yelp 600, our 14,000 are verified customers. They're not, someone going there to complain. So we're in the right place at the right time to start asking people questions. And that goes back to what I was saying. I mean, you start with one thing and then there's always a way to grow, and I'm thinking now about, what are the 1, 2, 3 things that come after that, that people haven't seen yet.
What was the initial reaction of restaurants when you started Up and Go, and how did you start with the minimum viable product?
Great question. Well, based on my experience with other startups, I think one mistake that entrepreneurs can make, at least I made, is you get this idea and then you go build it, right? Kind of in a vacuum. And then you go and you present it to someone that you want to use it. And then they say, well, this thing is, I need these three things to be different. And then you go crap. And then, and it becomes this back and forth. And having had that experience before, I didn't want to have it again. So I said, okay, look, the only way I'm going to build this is if I have a customer before I have a product. So I had recently met the owner of a pretty successful restaurant here in San Diego, and I went to him and I said, hey, look, I want to make it easy for people to pay at the table. I don't want to build it in a vacuum. I want to build it in partnership with a restaurant owner. And he said, look, this is really exciting. My ambition is not to open more restaurants. It's to do more interesting things like making a beer, making a brewer, making a beer, or, helping with technology. So we ended up just saying, okay, look, we're going to make this work in your restaurant. And if it works in your restaurant, it'll work in other restaurants. And, he used this point of sale called Aloha. So back in 2016, we said, okay, that's it. We need to have an integration with Aloha, and everything really started from there.
Did you find investment in the beginning, or did you bootstrap? How does this journey begin?
Well, I also, because I had a job, right? I really designed the beginning of Up and Go to I was thinking to myself, how could I piece this together where I have no chance of it not working? So I just talked about how I made sure the product was going to work. And then I also said, okay, also to my theory of starting small, I was like, okay, what do you really need to build this? One of my colleagues that I worked with before, Scott Weber, he's a software engineer, spent his whole life as a software engineer. And I said, okay, look, you're going to build this. You're going to keep your job and you're going to build this. And I'm going to keep my job and I'm going to do this. Matt obviously is going to keep his restaurant. And what do we need? Really, we don't need anything else other than, just our own time. So I think, I'm not even sure if we put $1,000 together in the beginning, just because we didn't. And I even specifically went and I got a checking account. I looked, I was like, okay, which bank doesn't have a monthly fee, even if you have 1 penny in your account, right? So I was like, okay, let's just build this thing so nothing can go wrong. That's what I did. So as long as you have those key, if you can have the talent to build a small version 1.0, and you can have someone there ready to use it when it's ready, you have a very specific problem you're trying to solve. You're not creating Microsoft Office or something like that. It's a very specific thing, paying a check. For me, that was what I thought, and I didn't want to have to go pitch a bunch of VCs, right, either. And so that's how we started it, in a way where I felt there was not a lot to lose.
When did you understand that there was a product market fit?
Well, I think the first time people paid with it, because we made these little flyers. I still have some of them in my cabinet from 2017. We started in 2016, but I think we turned it on for the first time in 2017. We just said, hey, look, put a flyer with your check. Here's how to pay with your phone. And we just kind of sat back and, I mean, that feeling of the very first person just seeing that and on their own accord following the instructions and paying the check, it's pretty exciting. It's like the first day my dad opened his $20,000 jewelry store and someone walks in and buys something. And I would imagine it's true for a restaurant too. If you open a restaurant, the first time someone comes in, and that fact that they just treat your business as, well, yeah, of course, this is a business that I'm going to do business with, that kind of that first transaction, it's, transformational and very validating.
What are some benefits using Up and Go for the restaurants and customers?
Well, I think the benefit for the customer is pretty clear. You're getting time back. You pay the check sooner, right? You can also split the check. Of course, that was the original idea. We've introduced payment methods to an environment where they weren't really there yet, like Apple Pay, for example. I mean, I think we have over 500,000 Apple Pay payments a month or something like that. It's quite a lot, to the point where Apple reached out to me. You're making the payment experience better for the guests. For the restaurant, I'm always, there's kind of three things for the restaurant. And what I think is the most important is not always what I sense the restaurant thinks is the most important. What I think is the most important is you're making your dining experience better. And a lot of restaurants make the mistake of they're I've actually had a restaurant tell me, look, they're going to pay, they have to pay me no matter what. Why should I invest in improving their payment experience? But that is the wrong mentality, right? You could put a shitty napkin. You could put crappy silverware. If you put a crappy spoon in front of someone and they're going to use it because they need a spoon, but they may not come back, right? And so the more you can make your experience better, the more likely someone's going to come back. And so it's really about bringing people back into your restaurant. And I've even done surveys where I ask people who paid with Up and Go, would the presence of Up and Go make you come back to this restaurant? Shocking 68% said yes. And I try to tell people this, and I don't know, they think I'm crazy, but it really has an impact on return business. So that's what I think is the most important. But what I usually say, because people seem to find it easier to believe, is that you turn your tables faster. And that's also true. And so, we can go back and see people who paid with Up and Go, people who didn't pay with Up and Go. Sometimes the difference is 20% faster, right? You could have like a place where the average dine time is 41 minutes and the people who pay with Up and Go are out of the table 8 minutes sooner. And when you do the math on that, like having people pay 20 minutes sooner actually has like a compounding effect on your capacity. So it means that you can actually have not 20% more capacity, but 30 or 40% more capacity. So, if you're paying $10,000 a month for this place with 50 tables, and now basically it's equivalent to having 75 tables, for a small monthly fee, that's really good. Return business is one thing. Turning tables faster, increasing your capacity, which also shortens lines, is another. And then the third is really just getting more information about your consumer. So right now, when you go to a restaurant, you pay and you leave, the restaurant doesn't know, most of the time they don't know who you are. But if you can if you can very easily just get their email address with the payment, and then you could say, hey, thanks for coming. We saw that you had, the pasta. We got a great pasta, come back in. And so just being able to connect to that customer again, that's also really valuable. So those, I think, are probably the three most important things that we have to offer.
When did you secure a funding for this startup?
Well, we don't have venture funding, so we really just have primarily a few very wealthy angel investors. Two of them have their own companies that have gone public, and one of them is worth over $100 billion business, and another one's in 30 or 40 billion. So we have some really successful CEOs. Fortunately, they've kept us funded, and I see people that go and they raise $20, $30 million, and then they're bragging to me about how they're losing $1 million a month, and I don't get it. And I think another thing that I feel is so valuable when you're trying to build something, a startup, even could be real estate, it's constraints. Because constraints are basically decisions that are made for you, right? Like if you have a piece of land and there's a boulder on it, and you're thinking about, where do I put the house on the land? Well, you can't put it where the boulder is, right? So you've already had that decision made for you. And so for a startup, when you don't have a lot of money, you really focus on, what do I absolutely have to do? What's the most important thing? If you have too much money, invariably, you're going to waste it, and I once got really close to a couple of years ago, really, really close to this VC putting in $15 million. And I swear, I think back on it, and just the other day, I was saying, I'm so glad that didn't happen, because I know what that would have meant. That would have meant that we would have hired tons of people. We would be going in every direction and potentially lose focus. But now, the product is better than ever because we're just like razor sharp on what needs to be done.
What are the biggest challenges that you faced in this entrepreneurship journey? For example, pandemic, was it a challenge or an opportunity?
It was definitely an opportunity. So I started 2020 with maybe 50, 60 restaurants. We're at 1,000 now. And I remember going into 2020, we were getting so close to having, I was always looking at how much people are paying with Up and Go. We were like so close to having $100,000 a week of people paying with Up and Go. It was like 99,800, And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and I kind of didn't know. I was just looking around to see what was going to happen. It went all the way down to the lowest week we ever had was, I remember there was a week, like in the core of it, where everything's closed, where people paid only $2,900 on Up and Go. And that was because people were like, I can use this for to-go orders. And then things just took off. People were like, oh, we need contactless payments. Guess who has contactless payments? Up and Go. Anyway, now we're up to something like $9 million a week. So we went, pre-pandemic, we were at 100,000 down to 2,900 and now 9 million a week. So it's, I guess the pandemic really was a catalyst for a lot of new technologies. And I think that includes, what we're doing.
What are the challenges, the worst moments of your journey?
Worst moments? Well, I think, like every day at the end of the day, I ask myself, like, what were the great things that happened today? And what were the worst things that happened today? I mean, in a startup, like every day could be a roller coaster, like I woke up today to an email from the CTO of a group with 500 restaurants saying, who we've met with before, saying, okay, now our chairman says this is a must have. So, that's exciting, right? And then there are days where you go and you see one of your biggest partners has formed a relationship with one of your competitors. And so this is something that's I've seen. And so you have like one good thing and one bad. It's like sometimes imagine you have two buckets of water and one's really hot and one's really cold. You put one foot in the hot water and one foot in the cold water. And is it comfortable? I don't know. Is it just like the equivalent of warm water? I don't know. That's what it's like to have a startup.
How is the competition in the market right now?
Well, it's originally we were really the first that did precisely what we're doing, pay at the table with the QR code with no app. And again, because it was very simple, you get a lot of copycats. And these people didn't have the foresight to know how complex it was. So many of them fell away. And really our journey has been like showing the market that Up and Go, we're like the people that know what we're doing. We have the history. As far as I can tell, we have more volume than anybody else. For example, that competitor I was talking about, we have at least 4 times their volume. So I don't know why people just make bad decisions. Yes, there are competitors. It's kind of, shaking it out. It's kind of shaking out now because this is something where you have to really be committed. And as I said, there's 1,000 things that can go wrong when you try to make this kind of payment. And I think I always go back to like MIT and how I love problem solving. This is really about problem solving. I have had my engineers come to me and say, this is what's going wrong in this situation, and you can't fix it. And I'll ask, are you sure? And then you're like, oh, well, actually, if you put these two things together in this way you wouldn't have thought, then problem solved.